Hey y'all, we're going to be doing some videos. I'm starting to do some videos, at least a little bit nervous about it. Not sure what you guys want to see, not sure what I want to get out of it. But I'm going to start talking to some of my friends, and hopefully you guys can offer me some suggestions about who you think I should talk to, what you want us to talk about. It could be anything from business to personal life. I'm just interested in hearing from you guys and hearing about what things you want to hear about. Facebook is flooded with a lot of head trash, and I want to see how we can get through that. So help me, and let's grow together.
I'm asking each of you to be pioneers towards that new frontier.
We are prepared to reaffirm with the most concrete evidence our readiness to help build a world in which all people can be productive and prosperous.
The first time I met you was in college. Today my guest is Dr. Jenny Seiss, and she is clinical psychologist, right? Mm-hmm. And you are located at Oak Tree Guidance and Wellness, which is here in Fort Wayne.
Right.
And I wanted to have you on today because I felt like our lives have crossed paths in personal and business a lot in the past 6 months, maybe?
Yeah,
6 months?
Yeah, probably.
Another thing, just for the people who are listening here, we're kind of in an industrial setting until we find a permanent home. So there's going to be fans kicking on. We're at Three Rivers Distillery, and we had to wait a little while for the distillers to get done. And so we've got fans, doors, and maybe a little live music. But so there might be a little technological difficulty with today's podcast, just a little bit. I'll take all the blame for that since I don't have a permanent home. But in any event, so our lives have paths have crossed in business and personal in a variety of ways. And so I wanted to have you on. It was important for me to invite you as a guest because I felt like I needed to have a little bit of talk about that a little bit, and also because I think some of these issues are relevant, and you're the expert, so to speak.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I want to put you on the you're in the hot seat today, and so the first thing that I wrote down a couple different questions I want to ask you about today, and one of the first things that is kind of recent news in Indiana is CBD oil, which is a cannabinoid oil that was passed here in Indiana recently. From my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're allowed to have this CBD oil that has THC in it, the active ingredient of marijuana, and it has to have like a concentration of 0.03 or 0.3. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'm not sure which either, actually.
Okay, so
3%, so 0.03.
3%, yeah.
Yep.
So you started to carry that in your clinic,
Yep.
or facility, or however you describe it. And why did you start? Why did you think that was going to be something that would help some of your patients, or why did you start carrying it?
Well, so our focus is to be as holistic and natural and healing as possible. And the research with CBD oil is really interesting in that we're finding benefits in it in every way, from being an anxiolytic, which is helping someone with their anxiety, to an anticonvulsant, which is helping someone with a movement disorder. So we're seeing these significant benefits, and it comes from a plant. And so whatever you believe about God or the big world, that plant was natural and had included everything it needed to include to come to be. So it's a natural substance to use in healing.
It's a more holistic approach.
Yes.
So back up a little bit, because I kind of dropped you into the CBD conversation a little bit quick. From your practice perspective, like from how you approach patients and so forth. When you say holistic, how does that actually integrate into what you do with patients and so forth? When you say holistic or natural healing, how does that, from a clinical psychology standpoint, how do you integrate that into your particular practice?
So what that means is we stay strength-based and strength-based focus. So there's two different ways in psychology to approach mental illness, if you will. So one is kind of a disease-based way, like you have bipolar disorder or you have ADHD. So we identify whatever the group of symptoms that you have are, and then we treat the symptoms, either pharmacologically, or you need to think differently about it, or you need to behave differently about it, versus from a more holistic way, which is understanding that those symptoms are communicating something to us, and they're not really the problem. The symptoms are not the problem. Rather, there's a problem that is creating the symptoms. And so with holism, our job is to understand what that you have these symptoms, and so when you come to see me, now our job is to figure out what is the problem that's creating these symptoms. Does that?
Yeah, no, that makes
well?
complete sense. So,
Yeah.
long time ago, when I got my Bachelor's of Science in psychology, I remember all of my psychological or my abnormal psychology class. We were talking about the differences between treating things with medicine, treating things with therapy, and treating things with therapy and medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you, from that standpoint, what is it that when you're talking about treating things more with therapy or holistic natural medicines like CBD oil or a variety of other
or
natural
acupuncture, yoga, meditation, massage, things that are going to engage the whole body from a physiological perspective, not just a psychological perspective, but a more positive physiological perspective, instead of with psychotropic medications that, and I'm not against psychotropic medications. I sometimes refer patients to be treated pharmacologically. But what I think happens sometimes is we take that pill as like we think it's going to be, the magic pill is going to cure the problems, and we don't really address the underlying problem.
You didn't actually say this, but it came to mind, self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like you're talking about yoga, acupuncture, meditation. Those seems like things that get you in tune with what it is that's actually going on. You're maybe tracking your own biometrics, if you will, kind of understanding what your body's doing, when it does what it does.
And helping you regulate your system. Yeah. So, like, I think a lot of symptoms, like anxiety, depression, ADHD, are actually when our body becomes dysregulated. And so things like yoga, acupuncture, meditation help us to regulate our system naturally.
I had a really good question at one point here a second ago, because I started thinking about CBD oil again, because I was talking to a neurologist, and he was saying that, I asked him, I said, hey, is this a placebo or is this actually helping? And his comment to me was, does it matter? If it's treating the symptom, does it really matter whether it's a placebo or it's actually helping, if the person actually believes that it's helping? And I don't know the answer to that. If it's a placebo versus actually helping, does that matter for the individual, for the patient?
No, but what I would say is that if it's not really helping and change really isn't being established, then whatever symptoms you have that you're taking the CBD oil for, since they're not really being treated, they're going to pop up somewhere else. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole. If you don't really treat the underlying cause of whatever is the etiology of what's going on, then it's just going to pop up and turn into something else.
So you know this, not everyone knows this, who's listening for the first time. I'm a divorce attorney, and I meet people all the time who I feel like, and I've talked about emotional anchors before. You've got these things that have happened in your life. You've got these, whatever it is, relationships that you've maintained that have caused you to be held back in some way. And you just can't seem to get you just can't seem to get over like the damage or the hurt, something like a PTSD almost. And although I don't know that that's the right terminology, but it seems like what it would be. For someone who has that kind of issue, is CBD oil going to be something for them? Is it going to be, and I got to this because of the whack-a-mole. The whack-a-mole comment was what made sense to me, because I see people who get divorced multiple times, and it seems like the same issues, the same emotional baggage and anchors that they had in relationship 1 pops up in relationship 2 and relationship 3, or any variety of relationship. Doesn't have to be marriage, but it seems like it always is consistently popping up. How do you get someone to see that or get a remedy for them? It doesn't necessarily need to be CBD oil, but when you say whack-a-mole, that's in my head. That's kind of what pops up, is these people who just can't seem to get over the underlying symptom, the underlying problem,
right?
And it's causing them frustrations in their relationship in other regards. So how does that equate into what we're talking about? I know it's super complex.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the answer, like no one wants to hear, but everyone expects the psychologist to say is like, it's probably got something to do with your childhood, and I could be wrong.
Some kind of Freudian.
But no, like our relationships, the way we understand what relationship is and how we act in relationship to another, we learn in childhood. We first learn in childhood how we were in relationship to our parents and how our parents were in relationship to each other. And so that's our limited experience of what relationship is. If we don't have an awareness of that, which most of us don't because we don't sit around thinking about it, then that is what tends to get acted out in our marriages. And so how does CBD oil help with that? I think it doesn't unless you make the decision to do some self-reflection and work around that, which can be really scary initially, but I think it's actually quite fun. And you can do things like things that support you in doing that work, like practicing yoga, like meditating, like potentially taking CBD oil if you have a lot of anxiety, which will help regulate your system and make it more easy to do that work. Does that make sense?
So what I'm hearing is like CBD oil treats a symptom until you can treat the underlying issue, whatever it might be. Yeah. And so I guess from that standpoint, let me see if I can think of another reason here. So not reason, but so one thing you talked about was you said it could be a lot of fun. You were referring to the actual treatment and realization of something, I would imagine, right? Yeah. So what do you mean? Give me an example of something like that. Like what? Because people look at my job and they're like, that can't be fun. You're a divorce attorney. That can't be something. You've got to go home at night and be like just completely emotionally exhausted. And I don't, because every day I meet new people who have new experiences and I get to build new relationships. So I, like you, think it's fun. Yes, there are cases that are not fun. So what's fun from a psychological standpoint? You're dealing with people who come and talk to you all day long, but things going on in their life, many of them probably not very pleasant. How does that become fun? How do you enjoy your job as much as I enjoy mine? And then explain it to people in a way that gets them like, okay, I guess that could be fun.
Well, here's what I would say. Like, there's a reason, there's a purpose to everything we do. There's a purpose and a reason for where we sit, why we say what we say. But most of the time, we don't have a general awareness of it. And a lot of times we're doing things and we don't know why we're doing them, but we're doing them, and oftentimes we're even watching ourselves doing them, going, this is crazy, I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm doing this anyways. And so what's really fun is when I'm working with someone who's really into it and courageous and wanting to understand, when they have that aha of, oh my gosh, this is why I do this, or this is why I am this way to my husband or to my wife or whatever. It's just exciting, and it's generally like just something we can laugh at ourselves about, and And I actually do a lot of laughing in therapy because I think there's nothing we can do but laugh at ourselves. They put me way back in the corner because they say I laugh too loud, but yeah.
I have done therapy in my life, and I have found it tremendously helpful to, and I tell all my clients, go, even if you don't think you need it, go get it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's helpful
Yeah.
to go sit with someone for an hour, once a month, once a week, whatever, and just yell at them. All the things that you can't say to whoever you want to say them to, just go get it out and go yell it at someone else who's kind of a disinterested third party who can take it in stride and not internalize it, right? So I mean,
you could totally pay me to come do that.
Just to come get yelled at for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want me to listen, but I think it's also more than that, because it's like, why is this pissing me off so much? Why am I reacting to this? Because I don't need to. And so I think that's where like the work of therapy can come in, where it can be really helpful and useful. Yeah, I mean, people can come in, and some people do, and just want to talk, and that's fine. I like, one of my favorite teachers talks about having the fuck you journal, and so it's just a journal where you just write all those thoughts and things down that you want to say to another person, but you really probably shouldn't. And,
right.
Yeah.
What's the composition of like your practice? Who do you see, and what are the men, women, children, adults, and what is kind of the makeup of the issues that you generally will deal with? Is it across the board? I'll let you describe that before I start putting words in your mouth. But what is the composition there?
I mean, it's a good mixture of everyone. We do tend to see more women than men, and I think that's just a societal issue of men don't feel, men are kind of socialized in our society to not have feelings or not ask for help. So I think that's a function of that. But yeah, so I see a lot of women. I see a lot of families, a lot of children, a lot of families bringing their children in. And issues range from, anxiety, depression, those kind of symptoms are very, very common.
What about the past year, maybe longer, but I think I've become predominantly more aware of it the past year, and I think everyone who's seen any award show in America has probably become more aware of it. But you'll say like the hashtag Me Too movement or hashtag Time's Up movement, powerful men and women standing up for their rights. We had probably the largest women's march in our history, in U.S. history, in the past year. We've had an entire year of a lot of women marching, and a lot of women's issues becoming more mainstream media issues. Have you seen that in your practice? How has that affected your practice, if at all, or not?
That's interesting, because I have definitely had the experience, a couple things I would say. One, I have had women from an older generation who grew up and were, young women in the workforce at a time when sexism was really blatant, who because of the Me Too movement have shared for the first time their stories, which is really just honoring to hear someone's story about that for the first time, and really inspiring. So definitely I've seen the consequence of that, and even with and then also the other thing that is really cool for me, because it was also a personal experience that I had, but also seeing women my age and younger women recognizing how society's view of women and the way we were socialized has impacted our sense of self-confidence or esteem, and does that make sense? Yeah.
You've seen that. That's something that you've seen.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of you gave me so much to talk about there. I'm struggling to pull out the individual questions I had. One of the questions I had was, so women are notoriously low for self-reporting abuse, domestic violence, rape, sexual assault of all kinds. Again, another
any survivor.
Any survivor. That again is another issue that has been more mainstream media issue, more brought up in the mainstream media in the past year. Has that been changed by this movement? Have people started to stand up more? Or do you think that will change, or is it changing?
It is changing, and I think it will change. We're going through like a huge social change in our country about different issues that have come up over the last year, and I think if you think about 20 years ago, Oprah had the first episode of all men who came out, if you will, or identified that they were sexually abused. That was the first time a group of it had been talked about that it was a thing, that men were sexually abused, and that it was on TV. You had all these men standing up and in essence saying "Me Too," and what social change that brought about just doing that. So to think now how the impact of these movie stars coming out and TV personalities is having on people is really profound.
Is it actually helping everyday people, though? I mean, you see the stories about actors, you see the stories about powerful people in powerful positions. Is this helping everyday people, though, in our community and just average Joes and Janes?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't see how someone could say that it's not. Like, we look how if someone famous has the cool glasses, all of a sudden all society's wearing those glasses. So their courage in standing up and sharing their stories, I think, has a profound impact on encouraging others to share theirs.
Have you seen that in your practice? Like, you have patients who are coming out?
Yes,
survivors?
Yes, yeah.
What's the worst case you've seen where you didn't think this person was going to be able to either approach their abuser or get over it, and they've managed to get over it?
I've seen really not much surprises me anymore, and so I don't want to. I need to be careful of sharing any specifics of any cases. But what I can say, is just the generic thing, but is so profoundly true, is that people are so incredibly resilient. It's all inspiring. So I just hear stories that just knock the wind out of me. and the first time you hear some of these stories, you think, oh, that couldn't be true. This person's just feeding me a line of shit. But then, because it's so not your experience, and so yeah, it's really really something.
One of the other issues I wanted to ask you about, and I know we could probably talk about any one of these issues for hours, is social media. This is going to be on Facebook. This is going to, our interview, our little discussion here is going to be on Facebook. We go to Facebook to get news. We go to see what our friends are doing on Facebook. When my wife's plane took an emergency landing in Pennsylvania on her way to a photo shoot in New York this past week, she didn't know where she was. Literally didn't know where they put the plane down. I got onto Snapchat. I went to the map on Snapchat, and I saw that she landed in...
She wasn't on the Southwest plane, was she?
No, she was not on the Southwest plane. She landed in Lehigh, Pennsylvania, near Allentown. Had no idea where she was. She said they shook like she was inside of a bottle shaking for an hour. And they landed her plane in Pennsylvania. So I was able to go to... The point here, I was able to go to social media. I was able to find out where the heck she was.
Yeah.
Because she opened up her phone. Her phone said Snapchat had the map, and there she was, planted right at Lehigh Valley Airport, which I never would have been able to. Before, I would have just been like, well, where are you? She said, I don't know.
Yeah.
So social media has its benefits. That's we understand that social media has its pitfalls. I think we've talked a lot about that in mainstream media in the past year. But from a psychological standpoint, if I were 14, 15, 16, growing up in high school with Facebook and Snapchat and, just the constant distraction of social media in my life, how would I be a different person today, or how would I be at more risk for psychological disorders because I was using social media as like the platform to engage in my life as opposed to actual personal interaction?
Well, it depends on your parents.
Okay.
I think that it's really important that we know our kids and not start going into fear-mongering mode about all these about social media, because it really does depend on who is the kid and how involved are their parents and are they literally escaping into it. But what I think about just like how one thing that this is doing is, we're, like you said, we're constantly barraged by it. We're always, like we were talking earlier, our phone was like, and probably still is, each within a hand reach of us. And so we're never just still or quiet. We always have that to pick up. And our brains need time to relax, and we physically need time to just be still. And so before, when we're driving our kids to soccer practice, or when you were riding in the car, you were just still looking out the window. But now they have like a movie screen they're watching, or they're on their phone looking at something, and so there's never time for quiet. And so we're constantly like in our kind of fight or flight mode, just kind of doing things and never just being.
So personal example, I have cut down, I call it screen time, right? I've tried to cut down. I have an Apple Watch. I take that off now more. I used to wear it every day, all day long. I take it off now because it buzzes on my wrist like I'm a waiter at Ruby Tuesdays, and I got to get it off. Otherwise, I'm going to be always distracted by email, text messages, updates on my website. I cut down the screen time and the primary reason was because I noticed at home I was spending more time on my phone than I was engaging in conversation with my wife. And so I made an conscious decision to do that. Also a conscious decision at work so that I could spend more time on my cases. And that's more of a time management thing, mm-hmm. and an interpersonal relationship with my wife mm-hmm. type thing. But I'm curious about immature individuals using it for, you hear about sexting, you hear about like Snapchat. That's not stuff that's like, those are things where people can send photos, videos mm-hmm. that are supposed to be like discreet, they disappear after 10 seconds or what have you, but are now being captured forever. And I gotta believe that I'm a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid, or even college-age kid. There are certain things that I don't want out there for the rest of my life. And then they are out there, and now I'm depressed, I'm anxious, paranoid, maybe suicidal. Like, those are the things that I find really interesting about social media use and mental health of people, particularly younger people.
Like saying, so you're saying, like, does that create mental health problems?
Does it make worse? Someone who is anxious already, is that going to make them, manic or what have you? That's kind of the way that I look at it, or my question, I guess. Does it make things worse?
Yeah, I think definitely it could, but that's interesting because the other thing, so I've had several families that bring in their adolescents to me and said, like, we caught him sexting, or we caught him looking at something he shouldn't have been, or being bullied, cyberbullying. But when we were talking about, like, earlier, like, symptoms and problems, my experience so far, for the most part, outside of, like, I think one kid where I was just like, he's kind of curious and maybe it's time to have like a talk about sex. Most of the time, like, I see that as we have found that to be like a symptom of something else that was going on in that kid's life.
So, but from the cyberbullying standpoint, how frequent are you seeing stuff like that really causes, I guess it doesn't have to be kids either. I feel like that could be, I've got adult clients who have been bullied by their spouse using social media. They go to the church group and they say, these are what he or she did in our marriage. Can you believe that? And they ostracize them from an entire congregation. So it doesn't have to be kids. It can be adults as well. And how do you provide therapy for someone like that? How do you help them work through those kind of issues when that's when the inception of their anxiety is that?
I think like any other trauma, like, because I mean that's what it is in those situations. So we learn not to care what other people think about us. We learn to hold space for ourselves, and we move forward. Because what can you do?
How are there like exercises you work with people to get them to do that, to get them to understand to hold space for themselves? Or I always tell my wife that I say whatever I want because the people who care don't matter and the people who matter don't care. And she's like, well, that's not how it works. Because you can say some pretty offensive stuff and piss some people off even if they care about you, which of course is true. But the point is you should be able to share your thoughts with people. So what are like exercises that you use to do that? I mean, do you have exercises where you walk people through that kind of stuff, taking time for themselves and being able to articulate their thoughts and emotions more outwardly instead of being withdrawn?
Yeah, teaching mindfulness and meditation and self-compassion. Absolutely.
When you say mindfulness, what do you mean by that? By mindfulness?
So mindfulness is about being present in the here and now versus we're oftentimes kind of worried about the future. How's this video gonna look? What's it gonna sound like? Or
it's gonna sound like we're in a wind tunnel, and every time we get to the most important thing, it's just gonna sound like we've got hurricane winds behind us.
Or we're worried about in the past, if only, and the regrets we have, the mistakes we've made, and so mindfulness is just teaching people to pay attention to the wind tunnel and what's that sound like. Can you hear the different sounds within that engine running or whatever it is, and maybe a little bit of the music in the background, and just starting to focus more on being in the present moment, just as it is.
Yeah, because without a doubt, this is probably the more distracting location we could have had this at. We picked it for its because I mean those distillery tanks are kind of neat, and so are the whiskey tanks. They're both barrels back there, but maybe not the most conducive to our talking back and forth. In any event, so when I first met you, we had a really difficult case. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it was really difficult. It was difficult
for different reasons.
Because it was like there was difficulties with one of the parents, and there was difficulties with some of the children, and it was and then there was interpersonal relationships between not only the children and their one of their parents, but also between the parents themselves. Mm-hmm. And I remember you being super nervous to be in the courtroom because that wasn't really your bailiwick.
No.
And that was several years ago now. We've known each other for some time. That case is long gone. Mm-hmm. But from that experience, what did you learn about yourself and how you deal with stress? Or because I mean, you were in the courtroom, you were in front of the judge, and you've never done that before. I remember I called you, just be like, "All right, you ready to go on Tuesday at 2:30?" And you're like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Ready to go where? What are we doing?
Yeah.
So I had to walk you through this entire...
which was really helpful, and I'm still grateful because I can now... I was even an expert witness a couple of weeks ago
For one of my colleagues?
No, no, they're down in Indy.
Okay.
For a really interesting case. But so I feel comfortable, more comfortable in the courtroom now because of you, so thank you. What did I learn about myself?
Talking about mindfulness, self-awareness, all those things.
Yeah, I do not like making mistakes. I do not like, so something that some attorneys are known for is taking words and twisting.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
No, and you I've not had that experience with you, but
yeah,
that's
you haven't had that experience with me yet.
Probably.
Before this is over, we will twist your words somehow.
Yeah. So so I had to learn about myself. Gosh, really trusting myself, and whatever that. So I call my best friend anytime I get ready to do something professionally, like any kind of speaking engagement, and I do a lot of community talks on parenting and things like that. And I still get nervous no matter how many times I give the same talk, and will get sick to my stomach. And you saw how nervous I was earlier today, and so I'll call her on the way, and I'll say, okay, I need the talk. And she will say, you are the expert. You know this. And yeah.
So I had a friend who, this was probably a decade ago, and she lived in Fort Wayne, and she couldn't seem to get rid of this guy. She kept going back and forth with this guy, dating him. And we're going to call her Jessica Smith,
okay.
Right? And I remember her being so angry that this guy kept cheating on her, and she kept going back, and she's like, but I just have to keep going back to him. And I remember turning to her, and I said, you are Jessica motherfucking Smith. You don't need anybody. You are the most important person I know. And she called me like 5 years later, right? She'd moved. She'd gone to a different job. And she goes, I just want you to know that was the most important thing anyone has ever said to me. And it was like the most basic thing. I think I was probably at a bar and had probably 10 drinks when I told her that. Because she just needed to know that she was the most important person. And it didn't have to be to me or anybody else.
She needed to be encouraged. You gave her courage. You gave her courage.
And it was basic.
Yeah.
It was super basic.
And that's what encouragement is. Yeah.
So I remember, so you are the expert, right? And I think I have to say that to my wife, my friends. I think I've said it to myself a couple times, maybe in the mirror before trial. But I've got my own like routine that I think I've spent so much time doing what I do in high conflict, super intense situations that I have just learned how to maybe do that on my own by either music or like a speech or just over preparation. I over prepare. That's like a huge thing for me. And then once I over prepare, like before trial, I will I'll pick an album or a list of songs, and those are the only songs I listen to for like that whole week. I used to do that for finals in law school. I would do like I would pick an album, and I remember one year it was like my wife made fun of me because one year it was Wicked, the soundtrack for Wicked. That was like my thing. I don't know why. I can't tell you that. I did one year it was Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Nice.
Stadium Arcadium. One year was like Led Zeppelin. I don't remember, but
Nice.
It was always the same, and so I kind of like learned how to deal with that on my own. But I've always been a really independent person. So how do you take someone who's never been an independent person, someone who maybe comes from a sheltered lifestyle, and get them to like break out of that mold and get to a place where they can be confident in their life and what they do?
Give them courage.
How do you do that? I work with that with spouses, men and women who like are super timid with their spouse, and they have lived an entire marriage where they just have been the subservient spouse. How do you get them to break out of that mold and be someone different?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's helpful is going back to the like childhood thing, like understanding how we got to where we're at. And maybe sometimes even like how we lost our courage, because we're born like really perfect. I don't want to get too much into it, I guess, but then things happen, and we lose courage in life. Even if we had a great childhood, things happen to us, and we lose our courage, and so we become discouraged, and that's having a loss of courage, and that is, for me, like that's mental illness. People who have mental illness are discouraged; they've lost their courage, and so what we need to do is give them, and we need to encourage them, give them courage to face life, work, relationships, spirituality, whatever it is, and so yeah, showing someone their strengths, and letting them know that that they matter in a very genuine, real way, and in pointing out their resilience.
So I'm going to steal some free therapy from you.
Okay.
Since I've got you here.
Okay.
For myself. I find that the degree of importance I place on someone will directly impact my ability to articulate my thought in a confident way. And I'll give you an example. If I'm in front of a judge I've never been in front of before, and even if I've over-prepared and I know that I've got a great case, good facts, good law, I will walk in and I will still be anxious, and I will lose the ability to articulate my argument in a way, like I'll find myself like kind of like puking up a sentence that doesn't really make any sense, and get this like weird look from the judge like, I don't know what you just said. And in my head I'm thinking, I don't know what I just said either, but I had to get words out because I'm confident enough to make a big mistake, but I know that I didn't do anyone any benefit there by vomiting up these words that maybe don't go together. Why do I do that? How do you go about, why do I do that? Why do I let that sort of scenario?
Do you really want to do this?
I do want to do this. I'm like really, I'm super curious. Why do I do that? And I've been asking myself that probably for about 6 months. Why do I turn into a bumbling fool when I place greater importance on someone who I think I'm a better attorney than, but I know that they hold themselves out as being like a better attorney than me or more knowledgeable attorney than me, but I melt.
So it's really interesting. Dan Siegel, who is one of my favorite researchers, favorite writers, studies behavior from a completely neurological perspective. So he's written tons of parenting books. He's written books for therapists, self-help books, but he studies misbehavior and times we overreact or underreact in life, times when we can't get a complete sentence out from a completely neurological perspective. And basically, he's proved why Adler, which I'm an Adlerian therapist, was right 150 years ago.
Real quick, who is Adler?
Okay, we got to talk about Adler.
Just talk about Adler real quick.
Okay, Adler was around the same time as Freud, so a lot of people have heard about Freud, but not very many people have heard about Adler, which is really crazy because no one does Freudian therapy, like nowhere. But probably there was just a review of the literature done within the last 10 years that said probably 95% of approaches to counseling today are based on Adler's work. It's just Adler was a shitty writer, and he didn't really care who got his ideas. He didn't care if he got credit. So a lot of approaches to counseling or therapy are based on pieces of Adler's work. But I got my doctorate at the Adler School. So it's a psychoanalytic, psychodynamic kind of theory.
Overreaction, underreaction.
Overreaction, underreaction. So basically, what happens when we do that is we're in a situation, in either a relationship or whatever it is that reminds us or brings to memory an unresolved or leftover issue from childhood, and so Adler would say there's some core decision you made when you were a kid that's still kind of subconscious, that's still there. It's not conscious, you're not aware of it, but when you're in a situation that feels like that kind of comes up, and that creates, Dan Siegel would say, our overreaction or underreaction is our unresolved leftover childhood issues. So So Adlerian theory in a nutshell, which I can't really give because it's really much bigger. But one of the ideas is, so we're kids, we're born, baby, beautiful, perfect, right? And then as things happen to us, so children are constantly making decisions about what is the world like, what am I like, what are others like, based on their experiences, right? And so because our brain's not fully developed, and because even if we had great parents, nobody's perfect, we make some mistakes, some of these decisions. And so these decisions, as we grow up, become non-conscious. And we're not even aware that what some of these decisions are, but we're walking around as adults still operating on these decisions we made when we were 7 years old. And so they're like sunglasses. They're how you view the world and others and yourselves. And so we all have a different color of sunglasses, and anytime we're in a situation like that, it screws us up sometimes. So one thing, I'll just tell you how you do this, right? So one thing
please help me.
So one thing that I do with my clients a lot, which is really fun, is if you get that feeling in your body that you have when you're in court and that happens, and allow yourself just to get that feeling in your body, and then allow yourself to think back sometime before the age of 12, and allow a memory, the very first memory, to come to mind, whatever it is. It may not be related or connected, it won't make sense, it could be completely insidious. But within that memory then is perhaps a decision that you hold true today that won't make sense. Like intellectually, it'll just be like ridiculous and you'll know it, but also you'll be like, but shit, I totally believe that. Like, does that make sense?
So I have to get in my time machine and go back to U12 George.
Sometime before the age of 12.
And think of a time when I felt the same way. When I felt like...
Not necessarily. Just allow yourself to have that feeling in your body.
So it sounds like, am I surrendering to it? Or
yeah, surrender to it.
Okay, and then
there.
What do I do?
And then just think about a memory that comes to mind, whatever memory it is.
And then how do I make it go away?
Well, change. The first step towards change is having an awareness about it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the free therapy.
Yeah.
I'll let you go. I know we've got, we could talk for hours on this, and I'm sure we will, because I'm going to be calling you probably tomorrow, asking you another question about something we're working on. But thanks for coming out today and spending some time.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Okay. Thanks.